The iPhone exists because of government funding. So does the internet. So does GPS. So does the touchscreen. So does the search algorithm. So does most of the basic science underlying the drugs that extend your life. The companies that assembled these components into products you use daily are genuinely impressive, but the components were publicly funded, the assembly was private, the profit was private, and this arrangement is almost never described accurately in the culture that celebrates it. That is not an argument against private companies. It is a description of how innovation actually happens at the frontier, and the description matters because the story told instead of this one is doing enormous political work. The story that innovation is primarily a product of private enterprise, of individual genius rewarded by markets, of profit incentives driving the risks that produce breakthroughs, that story is used to justify the inequality that concentrates returns in few hands, to resist the taxation that would fund the public research on which those returns depend, and to frame every constraint on private economic activity as a threat to the engine of progress. The story is not entirely false. The private contribution is real, but the foundation it builds on is largely public, and the foundation is being quietly underfunded by the ideology it produced. Start with what innovation actually is. The economist Joseph Schumpeter introduced the concept of creative destruction in 1942, the idea that capitalism progresses through the continuous disruption of existing arrangements by new ones. The entrepreneur who introduces a new product or process does not just add to the existing economy, they destroy part of it. The automobile destroyed the carriage industry. The word processor destroyed the typewriter market. The streaming platform destroyed the video rental store. Each disruption creates and destroys simultaneously, and the aggregate is progress because the new generally serves human needs better than what it replaced, or at least serves them more cheaply. Schumpeter's entrepreneur is not primarily a scientist. They are a commercializer. The function they perform is not discovery but deployment, taking what exists and making it available, affordable, and integrated into daily life at scale. This distinction is critical and almost always collapsed in the popular mythology of innovation. Steve Jobs did not invent the touchscreen. He deployed it inside a device with a specific combination of other technologies that made it transformative. The invention was prior. The innovation was the combination and the distribution. Who funded the prior inventions? The Internet began as ARPANET, a project of the United States Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. GPS was developed by the U.S. Department of Defense. The research behind touchscreens draws on publicly funded university research. The algorithm underlying Google's PageRank was developed by Larry Page during his PhD at Stanford, partly supported by a National Science Foundation grant. The basic research behind most pharmaceutical drugs begins in academic laboratories funded by public grants. The Human Genome Project, which made possible the personalized medicine that has produced billions in pharmaceutical revenue, was a publicly funded international collaboration. The economist Mariana Mazzucato has documented this pattern with systematic rigor. In her 2013 book, The Entrepreneurial State, she traced the public investment underlying every major technology in the iPhone and found that each key component had significant public research funding somewhere in its development history. Her argument is not that the state is better at innovation than the private sector. Her argument is that the state performs a specific function, funding the high-risk, long-horizon, basic research that markets cannot fund because the returns are too uncertain and too distant, and that this function is the foundation on which private innovation builds. The market does not fund basic research at sufficient scale. The reason is not failure of vision. It is the structure of incentives. Basic research produces knowledge that is non-excludable. Once discovered, it is available to anyone, including competitors who did not fund the research. The firm that funds basic research bears the full cost. Everyone. The return on investment is therefore structurally poor from a private perspective. Pharmaceutical companies fund clinical trials, not molecular biology. Technology companies fund product development, not materials science. The foundational layer that makes the applied development possible is overwhelmingly publicly funded. Now hold the counter-argument at full strength. The commercialization function is genuinely difficult and genuinely valuable, and the market performs it in ways that public institutions consistently do not. The history of publicly funded research that sat undeployed for decades is as real as the history of private companies that took public research and transformed it into products that billions of people use. The Soviet Union produced significant scientific research. It did not produce consumer electronics that people wanted to use. The difference was not the science, it was the mechanism for converting science into products that meet real demand. The private entrepreneur who takes a publicly funded discovery and builds a product around it is not simply appropriating public investment. They are performing a function that requires genuine skill, genuine risk-taking, genuine market judgment, and genuine organizational capacity. Many attempts to commercialize promising research fail. The ones that succeed look, in retrospect, like they were obvious. They were not obvious in advance. The risk of being wrong is real, and the entrepreneur who takes it deserves a return. The venture capital system, for all its distortions that we examined when we looked at speculation, does direct capital toward early-stage companies at a stage when the uncertainty is too high for conventional investors. This function has genuine value. The companies it funds have produced genuine improvements in how people live. The mechanism is not illegitimate. The argument, made at full strength, is that the public-private hybrid is not a scandal but a feature, that public investment in basic research and private investment in commercialization are genuinely complementary, that neither alone produces what both together produce, and that the appropriate response is not to nationalize innovation but to ensure that public investment is sustained at the level required to maintain the foundational layer. Here is the floor move. The patent system, the primary mechanism through which private returns on innovation are protected, has a documented relationship to innovation that is considerably more ambiguous than its justification assumes. The standard argument for patents is that without temporary monopoly protection, the incentive to invest in innovation disappears. If anyone can copy your invention immediately, you cannot recover the cost of developing it. The monopoly rent is the return that makes the investment rational. This is coherent. It is the reason patents exist, but the empirical relationship between patent protection and innovation output is not as clean as the theory predicts. The pharmaceutical industry, one of the most patent-intensive sectors, spends more on marketing than on research and development in most years, and a significant proportion of its R&D budget is directed at developing variations of existing drugs, new formulations, new delivery mechanisms, slight molecular changes that extend patent protection without producing meaningful therapeutic improvements. This is called evergreening. It is legal. It produces patents. It does not produce innovation in any useful sense. The technology sector has produced extensive patent thickets, overlapping patent claims that make it difficult for any company to develop new products, without licensing fees to dozens of prior patent holders, many of whom are not practicing the patents themselves, but simply holding them for licensing revenue. These are called patent trolls. Their existence does not drive innovation, it taxes it. Economists who have studied the empirical relationship between patent strength and innovation output, including Michel Baldwin and David Levine, in their 2008 book Against Intellectual Monopoly, have found that the evidence for strong patent protection increasing innovation is weaker than the policy discourse suggests, and that in some domains, strong patent protection appears to impede rather than accelerate subsequent innovation by raising the cost of building on existing knowledge. This does not mean patents should be abolished. It means the relationship between IP protection and innovation is messier than the standard justification acknowledges, and that the specific design of patent systems matters enormously for whether they serve the stated purpose or primarily serve the revenue interests of those who already hold patents. Now, look at the political economy of the innovation narrative itself. The story that private innovation drives progress, and that the conditions for private innovation, low taxes, weak regulation, concentrated returns, are therefore the conditions for human advancement, is one of the most powerful ideological constructs of the last 50 years. It has been used to justify tax policy that concentrates returns from publicly seeded innovation in private hands. The billionaire, whose company built on public research infrastructure, paying a lower effective tax rate, than the nurse who treated them. Regulatory resistance in the name of not stifling innovation, a framing that has been applied to delay environmental regulation, financial regulation, pharmaceutical safety regulation, and technology platform accountability, often by industries whose innovation claims are strongest when they face the most scrutiny. Immigration policy argued on the basis of attracting innovative talent, which is genuine, alongside the simultaneous defunding of the public universities and research institutions that produce that talent domestically. The narrative serves real interests. It is not invented, but it consistently obscures the public foundation on which private innovation builds, and it consistently resists the public investment that maintains that foundation while extracting private returns from what it produces. Now bring this into your daily life. Not as policy, but as daily reality. The medical treatment that exists for a condition you or someone you love has faced. The communication technology through which you conduct the relationships that matter to you. The infrastructure of connectivity and GPs that structures your movement through the world. These emerged from public investment that was made before you were born, before the companies that deployed them existed, funded by tax revenue from people who will never use what they funded. You are the beneficiary of a social agreement to invest collectively in knowledge that would benefit people who did not yet exist. That agreement produced what you are using right now to watch this. The question that stays with you is not about innovation policy. It is about what you assume when you see a product, a company, a billionaire, and attribute the thing to the person who deployed it, rather than to the long chain of publicly funded inquiry that made it deployable. And whether the returns flowing from that chain, the ones not going back to fund the next layer of public research, are flowing in a direction that makes the chain's continuation likely, or whether the foundation is being eaten by the building on top of it.